Welcome to Talk to Brazil with Tom Jarocka, the business connector to business in Brazil. Welcome to Talk to Brazil, the business connection, the world's first English language internet radio program about business in Brazil, now in podcast format. I'm Tom Jarocka, an American in Brazil, and I'm talking from my studio in the city of Campinas, São Paulo, Brazil. So when you talk to Tom, you talk to Brazil and the world. Today's guest is Aleksandra Jarocka, and Aleksandra is from Poznan in Poland, and she's now visiting Brazil and talking to us from São Paulo. She's a social integration training specialist and facilitator. She is also a board member of the Migrant Info Point in Poland. We met recently through a mutual friend at an event where I was making a presentation regarding speed networking to a group of entrepreneurs at a Be Amazing Challenge event in São Paulo. So with that, Aleksandra, hello and welcome to Talk to Brazil.
Hello, Tom, and thank you for having me.
Well, I want to welcome you again to Brazil. And I mentioned to our audience, we met very briefly at the event, and it was amazing in a very short period of time to learn so much about you. And
yes.
As I mentioned, when I was a child, I'd studied at a school that was basically, all of my friends were Polish, so it was very interesting to meet you. So congratulations again of coming, all right?
Thank you so much. It was really interesting to me that you had so many Polish friends and you were growing up in U.S. in such a Polish atmosphere. So that's very cool fact too.
It's really what brings me to what I call myself a multicultural person. And many years ago, and this is many, many years ago, when I was a child, I lived in Pittsburgh, and in the area where I lived, more specifically, was a city called McKees Rocks. And at that time, most of the neighborhoods in the city and around were very ethnical in their makeup. So you had the Italians, you had the Polish, you had the Slovaks, Romanians, you had all Hungarians, all different migrant groups who migrated to the Pittsburgh area and set up their own communities in their neighborhoods. And Pittsburgh at that time still was and is known as the steel city. So a lot of steel mills, a lot of mining in the area. And that really attracted a lot of people from Europe to the area. And that was the makeup. But my mother was from an Italian family, and my father was from a Scottish family. So I was one of the first. Yeah, no. And what was interesting, and that's why one of the reasons within that framework, most of my cousins from the Italian side generally spoke Italian and English. On my father's side, everybody spoke English. And many of my neighbors only spoke Italian. But the school that was closest to us was the Polish school. And that's why my brother and I went to the Polish school. And that, to me, today, helped me understand that the world is a completely different place than most people actually thought. And today it's even more complex. So understanding traditions, understanding culture, having an understanding for different languages in a global society that we are today is fundamental. So that was my background. So I didn't really learn Polish, even though my friends spoke it. But at the Mass was all, what wasn't sung in Latin was sung in Polish. So I did learn how to sing in Polish.
And that's very cool.
And as I mentioned, I did learn to eat some of the Polish foods, and my favorites until today are still pierogies. So
that's great.
That's where we are in our culture, okay?
Yes.
Now I want to talk about your work. And in Europe, as I mentioned, you are also a training person, a facilitator, and you're a board member of a migrant information point in Poland. But now you've been in Brazil, I guess, for a month now, is that correct?
Exactly, yes, 1 month.
And I saw, I guess, on Instagram that you also took part in a workshop here with migrants and with refugees. Is that true?
Yes, that's true. It was a workshop organized by a migration museum in Sao Paulo. It's a really great institution to definitely visit for everyone to learn about basically one of the reasons why Brazilian society is so diverse in ethnicities and in terms of where actually people came from to Brazil. It's a very interesting place to learn about that. And this museum has organized a couple of events about migration in Brazil during the week, the campaign of human rights.
Okay.
And and there was a workshop that, because I got in touch with the museum before I came to Brazil, we decided that we want to do something together. So we organized a workshop that was an exchange of experiences when it comes to working with migrants and refugees in a local context. In Poland and in Brazil. So it was like an exchange of experiences, exchange of the knowledge about what kind of rights migrants have here and in Poland, and what are the ways to support migrants community in Sao Paulo and in the city that I live in Poland. So it was very, very interesting experience for me, because as it turned out, Brazil and especially Sao Paulo state has a lot of good laws in terms of migration and receiving, welcoming migrants and refugees.
Now, that's an important point. And last week I also interviewed another person that I passed on her name to that I think you should meet and talk with. When we look, and really what you're talking about is the process of helping migrants integrate socially. Because migration and refugees, I don't want to overstate that, but we have them throughout the world. Even in the States, a lot of migration, a lot of refugees coming in here in Brazil, and more specifically to our global audience. We have an influx of Haitians, we have an influx of Venezuelans, other Latin American groups, but also from other countries, Syrians, Lebanese, that do come and reestablish themselves. And I think an important point to make that you've seen that Brazil and Brazilians are very welcoming in that. They may not understand the languages, they may not understand the cultures, but there are groups available and set up to try to help that process of integration. So what you've seen in Europe and comparing to what you've now seen in Brazil, the process of integration, social integration, is it the same? You have to understand the culture of the people coming, you have to know their language differences. What are the similarities?
So I think the similarities are definitely that there are a lot of institutions or more like non-governmental organizations that organize itself to help migrants integrate, to support them in that process. So that's definitely a similarity that I can see, that I've learned while meeting all these people there in Immigration Museum. I think definitely, of course, there is a process of getting to know the culture, the language. That has to be similar in every country which is receiving migrants. What the differences are, I would say, is that most European countries, or at least the European countries that the migration laws I am familiar to, have a more, as you said, the culture here is more open and more friendly, and that is reflected in the law. So most of the European countries that I know, and I can mostly speak for Poland, for example, has a more harsh approach to migration, and that results, for example, in having detention centers or having deportation processes, right? Which, for example, in Brazil is not so much present. It's sometimes even forbidden in law, as far as I learned from the experts here. So that definitely is reflected then on the migrants' communities, because they might feel less threatened by law. But of course, then there are also other problems, and we could talk about them probably for a few hours, if not a few days.
Right. But the similarities, you also mentioned before we started the podcast, you were involved in youth groups in Europe. And
yes.
You mentioned Polish groups and German groups. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly.
And what are the similarities there, if you can help us understand?
The similarities in working with those youth groups and working here, or what do you?
No, there you mentioned that you're working with German and Polish groups. You were talking about the language differences. It's a you have groups that are multilingual, actually. Some speak German, some speak Polish. You said some speak Russian, some speak Turkish.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So my work that I do in Poland is mostly right now facilitation of those groups. So the aim of actually bringing these people together is bringing those young people together, which is very important here, is that they learn about themselves, their cultures, but just also have the experience of interacting with another person that, for example, doesn't speak their language.
Right.
And my task there is to make sure that this process is going as smooth as possible. And so this is definitely a challenge when you have a group of people from Poland and a group of people from Germany, but actually it's way more diverse than that, because those people might live in those countries, but they are not necessarily Germans or Poles. They have migration backgrounds, and they speak different languages like Turkish, Russian, as you said, Arabic, and then Polish and Ukrainian, for example. And then we need to find ways to communicate beyond the language, so to say. So find ways to communication beyond that. And surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, the younger the participants are in the facilitation groups that I train, the better it goes for them. So the easier it is for them.
Well, I think that's the point to be made, that I don't have anything against older generations, because I'm part of that. But older generations tend to be more conservative in changing. They've also created a comfort. I mentioned my time in Pittsburgh when I was a kid. My relatives were very comfortable in speaking Italian while they were in the United States amongst all their relatives. It's not, and some of them never really learned English. So I can see your challenge of working with youth groups, and I think that's an important point. The youth across the board generally are more eager to integrate. Is that the bottom line? Can we say that?
Yeah, and I think it's easier for them because because they are younger, and that means that they don't have so many maybe internal borders, kind of, you know, that they that they see and they have, because the more older we are, I think we tend to see more borders between each other as people. So that's also like the goal of the work that I do, that we kind of don't look at those differences that seem kind of impossible to overcome,
Right.
as for example, language barrier or very different cultural backgrounds. And we just look at, okay, what we can do together. We can build, I don't know, a house out of the straws, plastic straws or something like that. And then turns out we can do that, and we are really good in that. So that means maybe we can do another thing and another thing. And and that really shows that, of course, children are more open-minded than teenagers. The younger they are more open-minded and more willing to do that, because they don't have all those kind of rules or differences in their mind yet, I would say.
Well, but too, I think, this is my opinion really, that technology has also helped that, because you mentioned, obviously, in what you do in Europe, the Polish and the German groups, the multi-languages in a group, it's important to try to either find someone to translate or to help through that. But technology today, anybody who has a smartphone in their hand is able to have things translated almost instantly, at least basic understandings of different languages. Whereas when I was a kid, that didn't exist. Either you spoke a different language or you didn't. You had very little technical capability of making an on-the-spot translation. You had to have a translator, a physical person to translate for you. So does technology help all of this?
I think it really helps. It really helps in terms of the things that you've mentioned. So it also helps migrants nowadays when they arrive to the destination, to the country that is their destination, that there are a lot, many more nowadays tools, also online tools that they can use to, for example, learn the language. And also the other way around, like for Brazilians, for example, to learn English. And I think it's very, very cool and very helpful, definitely.
Yeah, because in the what I've seen that, and the person that I interviewed last week was Vanessa Puerta. She's also an intercultural consultant. And she actually mentioned that as being a facilitator, and also mentioning, and specifically here in Brazil, that for migrants or refugees, there are online programs that help them, because here too, to be able to work, you do need a work permit. And what she mentioned today, the work permit can be had online. So there are these types of facilitators to ease this process of integrating a person and getting them, and that's the legal side that you mentioned. Because really to work legally, you need documentation, and companies are required to see that before they can hire you. But if that process, if technology is helping that process, that's helping the whole process of migration and refugee integration.
Exactly, definitely. The important point to make here is that there are some migrants groups that are less privileged than the others. So some of them might not have, of course, any access to internet or to computer. And then, of course, not all of migrants, unfortunately, they are able to access those really great tools. But that's the thing that also, as I've learned, different organizations in Sao Paulo state, and I'm sure in other states in Brazil also do, is to make lives of those people easier by also enabling them to access, for example, internet, to help them through that process too. So it's very, very, very important.
Very good. I just want to touch on a point that I mentioned when I came to Brazil. I didn't speak Portuguese. And some of the things of being in a society, in an area where you don't understand the language. You've come here. You said offline that you were here in August for a month. So actually you came to Brazil without knowing the language. You're trying to learn now. What is the impact? So you've come here. You're in a country that's sort of modern in many aspects. but you landed and didn't speak the language. How do you feel here?
Yes, that's a really interesting experience. I'm sure for you it was as well, but sometimes it's very frustrating because you cannot communicate with the people on your own, and very often you end up being dependent on someone when it comes to very basic communication. So it was like that for me. I just, when I came here the first time in August this year, I was just able to really say very basic words, and also I thought I'm going to understood very basic phrases or words, but as turned out in practice, understanding Portuguese, it wasn't that easy for me. Understanding what other people say wasn't that
easy for me either. So don't feel privileged in that.
Okay, I see. That's a common problem, right, for new Portuguese speakers. But anyways, so it was really difficult to understand. So I would say the experience of that was frustrating me, especially because I was meeting new people. Friends and family of my boyfriend, who is a Brazilian, and for me, not being able to say what I want to them, or not being understood by them, even though both of us were really trying. So I was really trying. The person I was talking to was really trying to understand me, but it just didn't work because of the lack of the language knowledge. So that was really, really frustrating for me because I ended up kind of not being able to talk to a lot of people without a translator. But then now, as I've started to really learn more, and now I really do my Portuguese course very intensely, I can say it's way easier for me. So yeah, I don't know, how was that for you?
I'm laughing here to myself because I found the same thing. You really want to communicate, you want to talk. You hear people talking in their own language and interacting, and you want to be part of that conversation. And really what I found for a long time was I was always smiling and sort of shaking my head and sort of in agreement and not really sure what I was agreeing with. But I just decided, well, smile and say okay and take things that way.
Exactly.
and that's the way it goes. But I think from a professional point, and this is for you, and this helped me back to the multicultural understanding, I felt when I came, and you felt that, of really how most migrants or refugees feel. Some of them, you chose to come here. I chose to come here. Other migrants or refugees don't necessarily have that choice. They sort of end up somewhere for any number of reasons. But the cultural impact of being in a place where you can't speak, it's massive. And you only feel that when you go through it.
Yeah, exactly. I really want to thank you for making that point because that's the thing. I have worked with migrants and refugees in Poland for 4 years now before I came here. And I never actually went through the experience that they were going through. So the people that I was working with on a daily basis, I never was able to feel what they were feeling or what they had felt when they first came to Poland. And as you said, either on their own, with their own choice, or totally without choosing to be in this country. Because before coming to Brazil, most of the countries that I visited were either German-speaking, or I also went to UK or US, and then I could very good communicate in English. I also speak German, so for me, I never had this this experience. So here, to be able to feel that was also very very important for me. So it was a good lesson.
And it is. Everybody talks about cultural shock, but you really only understand what it means once you've passed through it.
Exactly.
Well, Aleksandra, I want to thank you. We're coming to the end of our time, but it's been really enjoyable speaking with you. I'm going to congratulate you again on what you do and how you do it, not only in Poland, but now bringing some of your expertise here to Brazil and wherever you're going to be walking in your life throughout the world. I think social integration is a requirement that we all need to understand and know more about. And that's not only helping the persons integrate, but most of the people I know as eventual employers of people, they also have to understand that this is a process. We need to help include people. And the more we can include them and give them a meaning to life, the better life in the world will be.
Exactly. Thank you so much for saying that, and thank you for having me on the podcast. I'm really also impressed with the work that you do with the networking, and I think that's very important. And cultural and intercultural communication is really significant in that too. I'm sure. So also good luck with your work and with the podcast, and thank you very much.
Okay, and thank you again. I want to thank our listeners. You can also find out more about Aleksandra, and that's Jarocka, but you spell it, it's Jarocka, so that would be Jarocka, and it's Aleksandra's Aleksandra, Jarocka. Find her on LinkedIn for more contact and more understanding of what she does. And I also like to invite everybody to visit our website, which is www.talktobrazil.com. That's TALK, the number 2, BRAZIL.com. And thank you, our audience. Remind everyone that today's program was brought to us by Focus MI Market Intelligence. Focus MI specializes in market research for the Brazilian agricultural market. More about them on their site, FOCUSMI.com. Remember, when you talk to Tom, you talk to Brazil and the world. Goodbye, and thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to Tom Riach on Talk to Brazil, the business connector to Brazil.